Welcome to the I Work For Him podcast. I'm Michael Miracle, producer of the I Work For Him radio program, the voice of the faith and work movement. Our mission is to transform the workplace of every Christian into a mission field. What does that look like in your workplace? Let's find out right now.
This episode of I Work For Him was previously recorded for the Christian Leadership Alliance's Outcomes Conference podcast, where leaders come to invest the best of what they know into other leaders.
Remember, if you have influence over just one person, you are a leader. Together, let's listen to this podcast and learn more about leading God's way. Enjoy.
Martha and I are excited to host the Outcomes Conference podcast. Every podcast is dedicated to you, our Outcomes Conference podcast listener. We've got an incredible conversation today coming up with Brenda Long with Food for the Hungry, online at fh.org, fh.org. We'll be focusing on leadership, thriving, and of course, related outcomes. Brenda Long, welcome to the Outcomes Conference podcast.
Thank you, Jim and Martha. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
You know, before we get started talking about your leadership role and perspective of what God is doing through you as you lead a thriving environment within your role at Food for the Hungry, tell us how you personally keep your faith strong and your leadership Christ-centered each and every day.
Yeah, I think, my biggest challenge is to be still, to not be in charge. And this is my biggest challenge in my spiritual walk. So to stop planning, to stop directing, I even struggle with that in relationships with my marriage and family, and, just to be still. So, it doesn't come naturally for me. It takes discipline and intentionality. But drinking coffee comes naturally for me. I need it every morning. I want it every morning. And so I've tried to pair that with being still, being quiet, listening to God. And so I spend my mornings in the yard listening and being quiet. I find that, surrounding myself with God's creation just naturally draws me to Him. And so it's great prayer time, great time to reflect. And I also, I recently adopted donkeys from the Bureau of Land Management.
There's something that's never been said on the Outcomes Conference podcast.
Adopt donkeys.
Yeah.
And they're like giant puppies. And I find just being out there with them, even doing donkey chores, is just a time of reflecting on God and His, greatness and His creation and what He's doing in my own life, and listening to, how He's leading me.
Brenda, since nobody listening to this the podcast today, the Outcomes Conference podcast, ever struggles with being too busy and being too much of a doer, I mean, it really probably is a struggle that singularly is yours. Maybe you could, for the other one person in the world that struggles with that, is there one specific step, and all that, of course, noted sarcasm, heavy sarcasm there. What's one step you had to take in order to move towards being quiet? Because so many of us struggle with this being quiet thing. But what's one thing to get us moving in that right direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it was, it's constantly a battle in my mind of thinking about the next thing or the, next item on my calendar. And it was like saying out loud, stop thinking about those things. Be still, like verbally, I guess that's probably why I enjoy doing it alone outside, because nobody can hear me in a room or something telling me to stop thinking, be still, Brenda, be still, Brenda. So, just that act of verbalizing that is what helps clear my mind.
That's good. So if the donkeys ever talk, the first words are going to be still, because that's what they've heard, right?
No, they're going to say, what are you hitting me for? I'm trying to protect you.
When the donkey speaks.
Yes,
thank you. Going back to scripture on that one.
A little Balaam reference there.
Well, thank you for that. So one of the things, the Christian Leadership Alliance really has this theme of thrive this year. What does thriving mean to you personally, Brenda?
It means looking beyond my current situation, the current circumstances. So being able to see and step into the hope that's ahead, that I think has been especially pressing in the last year of, trying to imagine beyond the difficulty of 2020 and to see the hope that can come out of, what would seem to be a dire situation across the world. So yeah, just, and bringing people with me into that place of hopefulness so that they can continue to lead others there too.
So tell us about how Food for the Hungry enables those you serve to thrive, whether those you serve are the people that work underneath you or those people that you're helping directly with Food for the Hungry. How are you helping everybody to thrive?
So our work from day one, which is now 50 years old, was always about a holistic approach. So a holistic approach ending poverty, serving the most vulnerable through purposeful relief and development by addressing the physical and spiritual needs. So it has to be looked at through that lens of addressing it through physical and spiritual, because that's our whole being, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we partner with leaders and communities to bring about transformation. And so it's not us stepping into and creating these programs and then exiting and saying, well, good luck. It's partnering with the leaders of a community and, individual mothers, creating groups for their own, for other mothers and giving them tools to be able to teach others to learn what, the principles that they've learned. So, our overarching goal there is to be able to exit a community because they're thriving on their own. They're leading their own transformation. So, I think that's how we've developed the thriving in communities is they've taken hold of their own, what they want to do and transform their community.
But what does that look like? What does it look like for a community to thrive? When you guys start working with the community, what's the condition you usually get it in? And what does it look like when you leave it? Talk to us about that. Give us a picture.
Sure. Some of our principal programs are surrounded around child transformation. Because that's the next generation. And so, our child sponsorship program of, just really pushing that strong desire and purposefulness in education, in providing education. And so, partnering with the leaders to make sure that there's classrooms, building classrooms so that the community can see that education is really important. And teaching mothers about health and sanitation, how that can transform a community. And for them to be able to see that because of these principles of washing your hands before you eat or cook, how it changes the health of their children, how it changes, to not have the sickness, to not have the disease. And that mindset of it's something that they're physically doing and teaching that's changing that and creating better health, in their own community. So I think it's that transformation of, they're learning those principles and tools. We're providing that education, and then they're actually visually being able to see how that's changing them.
That's so good. And to see that thriving happening physically and spiritually is really what you're saying it's all about. So let's talk about Food for the Hungry as an organization. A lot of organizations struggle to find a way for the culture within to thrive. What is one thing that you're currently doing that is helping to have the greatest impact in the area of thriving within Food for the Hungry?
So I think that, I've been with Food for the Hungry for over 26 years. So it's been a long time. And I've seen that although some of the wording has changed in our organization, the principles that guide us, our calling, our values, and our response, those things have not changed. They've always been, a biblical foundation that allows our programs and our initiatives to thrive and to just flourish, So, within my own work at FH, Food for the Hungry has really poured in and cared for our staff, really seeking to want to see us thrive in our relationship with the Lord, creating these spiritual formation groups where it's like a small Bible study and we get to fellowship with other coworkers that we wouldn't normally work with. to study a book, scripture, spend time in fellowship. Just those are these simple ways that we've seen, our leaders really invest in seeing us thrive in our relationships, in our spiritual walk with the Lord. But I'd say within our communities, this last 2020, I mean, we've had to take a step away from doing our regular program work, right? When we have quarantine and things like that. And to see the resilience in our communities of, we've paused in executing our programs, but the people of the community have continued the community-led programming within their community, supporting each other. And even though our, FH staff have had to take this step back. So that's been incredible to see that around the globe where we work.
Hey, we're talking today with Brenda Long from Food for the Hungry, fh.org, fh.org. You're listening to the Outcomes Conference podcast. We'll be right back.
You know the kind of person that always tells you about the latest trends or the special deals around town? Well, lean in, because here's a message from that kind of person. The Awaken Podcast Network is the place to be. Go to awakenpodcastnetwork.com and unlock God's purpose for your work with help from some friends. You will find a gathering place of podcasts that provide simple tools, faith stories, and conversations that will inspire and equip you to vibrantly live out your faith in your work today. Go ahead, check out awakenpodcastnetwork.com and then be that kind of person and tell a friend.
Hey, welcome back to the Outcomes Conference podcast. We're your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and today we're talking with Brenda Long. She's from Food for the Hungry, and you can check them out online, fh.org, fh.org. Brenda, the last 12 to 18 months been a little difficult. I don't know if you noticed that, along with you trying to learn to be quiet. I know, again, you have that problem on your own. It's been, what have you had to change personally or professionally that helped you focus on your mission as a leader as a result of what we faced the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenging year plus for everyone. I feel that I'm always a better leader when I'm outwardly focused on others and meeting their needs. That's kind of just how I'm wired and geared. But 2020 has been definitely a different season for me, where I had to learn to be vulnerable in a way that was, probably really uncomfortable, and letting my guard down, expressing my own needs. I mean, as we all kind of stepped into this quiet time of, working from home and not having our regular cadence of meeting together in all different avenues, that was really tough for me. And still trying to find ways to reach out to my team, to connect us, that went beyond even just, our ongoing Zoom meetings, and really just trying to find ways to engage with each other. But I learned that letting my guard down and expressing my own needs is also an important aspect of leadership.
So talk about your breakthroughs and whether it had to do with that or something else. What did you see that was actually something, that really you got some breakthrough, or that really was successful in your leadership?
Yeah, I learned so much about God's faithfulness in this last year. I spent a lot of time studying the Enneagram. I'm a big fan of the Enneagram tool. And it's just such a powerful tool to help you understand yourself, help you understand how to relate and work with others. It helped me have, to be a better version of myself. So, in the last 12 months, my mom had a real quick 2-month decline, and she passed away in March of 2020. And, that was right when the pandemic was starting, and we all were, being pulled back. And so it was a lot of alone time with in my head. And as an Enneagram 7, like, I don't need a lot of alone time. I need a lot of fun and adventure and time with people. And so, that was really, really challenging for God to just have me have to deal with the grief, and to be forced rather than, being able to plan all these social things and keep my mind busy or move past and not deal with that. And so, I think that, that was a real breakthrough for me of just that time of being vulnerable and expressing in ways that I needed support, that I wouldn't have normally done.
A lot of times as leaders, we read a great book or read a great article or we experience a great conference or, there's something that we've learned and we say, everybody around me needs to experience the same thing. What was that for you? Was there something like that for you in the last 12 to 18 months that you said, my whole team needs to experience this?
Yeah, so books and I don't get along really well. I'm great with podcasts.
Okay, that works.
And conferences, things like that. I keep telling myself, I have some books here and I keep buying them and I start them and then I have to read like the same page over and over again because somewhere I got lost and thought somewhere else. But so definitely podcasts, definitely conferences. And for me, it would, I shared with my team, yourenneagramcoach.com for a podcast. I mean, fantastic way of being able to understand each other as good, as good coworkers and to be able to relate to one another. Also, the Digital Outcomes Conference, I attended not the in-person, but, the conference. And then we had kind of that digital version afterwards last year. And so that was a fantastic opportunity to invite my entire team to be a part of that. And so, I offered that up to anyone who, could make space to attend that for the the last month or so that it took place. So I think that anytime that we have opportunities to really, be able to give that kind of encouragement in your leadership, that we need to go ahead and offer that up. But yeah, the Digital Outcomes Conference was a big one for me for pushing on my team.
Yeah, and that plug was unsolicited. You guys hear it right here on the Outcomes Conference podcast. We're talking with Brenda Long today from Food for the Hungry, fh.org. We'll be right back.
Want to build a profitable side hustle that impacts people with truth and healing in themselves and their leadership? Then look at becoming a certified leadership coach with Giant. Giant has been in the leadership space for over 13 years and has over 500 coaches in over 127 countries. Their coaches are being hired by Fortune 500 companies and organizations like I Work for Him. Jim and I took the Giant Sherpa training under one of these great coaches to become leaders worth following. Giant gives you everything you need to start your own coaching business from scratch, like hands-on training from top-level coaches, access to an all-in-one online platform to run your entire coaching business, and you get to join a thriving community of coaches around the world. To get started, Giant is hosting a coaching business workshop to help you learn how to build a successful coaching business. This workshop is 100% free, and you can reserve your spot by going to giant.tv/I Work for Him. If you're ready to impact people and get paid to do it, go to giant.tv/I Work for Him. That's giant.tv/I Work for Him.
Hey, welcome back to the Outcomes Conference podcast with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg today as we talk to Brenda Long from Food for the Hungry. Check her out online, fh.org, fh.org. Martha?
So Brenda, you guys have a digital, an ebook that you want to share with the listeners. So is there anything you want to tell us about it? We'll put the link in the show notes and on the YouTube and stuff, but it's called God's Story. Tell us a little bit about it, what they'll find when they download that.
Yeah, this is just an incredible resource. So I hope that you do check it out. But it's, written within from one of our staff members. And it's just been a tool to understanding and walking through God's worldview. And so really just putting into perspective, how we were created and how we are restored in Christ and how we walk with that knowledge and how we serve. So really just hope that you be able to check that out, download that.
Excellent. Thank you for offering that. So Brenda, let's talk about Food for the Hungry. We know, I'm guessing, I don't want to be a pessimist, but, hunger is probably never going to completely go away. So how do you keep serving every day when you realize that the work you're doing is never going to really be fulfilled, but it is going to gain in its ability to, to do its work? So let's talk about that.
So yeah, hunger. We have a lofty vision there. And, God did not call us to complete the work. And so I think that's an important piece that you keep in front of you. And for anyone that's serving in a mission type organization, we continue the work and he completes it. He finishes it. So, I take relief and hope in that I'm called to partner with him in the work. It's not on my own strength, but his. And he will complete that work and finish that work. So I think that's how, we look at that goal, that vision that we have, is that we're just a part of it.
That's a great word. I love that. All right. So we're coming to a close on the podcast. And the Christian Leadership Alliance is a place where leaders love to come and invest the best of what they know in other leaders. Okay, that's just something that happens all the time with the Think Christian Leadership Alliance. Brenda Long, what leadership idea or thinking would you like to share as an investment in those listening today to the Outcomes Conference podcast?
So, I guess I'd like to share that, we're all leaders in one way or another, even if it's not in your title. And so, even with our team members at Food for the Hungry, I think, the leadership presses upon that you are leading, whether you have a manager, supervisor, director role, you're leading others. And so I think that, if we keep that in the forefront of our minds, then we see the importance, right? That, we have a responsibility as Christians to be living a life that leads others to Christ, to show them God's love. What are we doing that would point them to Christ? And so, I see CLA playing a really important role in that, in developing leaders. And so, this is my year plus partnership with CLA and connection with CLA. And, I still haven't yet taken that dive into all of the resources. There's so many, but I'm excited about, making space for that.
So as a leader, I just want to speak to the listeners right now and just encourage you to jump in, to dive in and get involved in those resources. Like Brenda said, there are just so many things available through the Christian Leadership Alliance, and we're grateful for that. And there's something for everybody, right? It's not just that, maybe we can't consume all of it, but that's why there's so many different options. And this podcast is a part of those wonderful options. So I'm just very grateful that you have been able to share with us and with the leaders.
Brenda, at the beginning of the podcast, you talked about how God just led you to be quiet and how he sends you outside. And in the morning, which is important, you said the morning, must be early morning because in Phoenix, that area gets a little hot during the summertime. But you also mentioned you got 2 donkeys. And I'd love to know how God has used you caring for those donkeys to help you be a better leader.
It's funny. I think part of it is because, they can't talk back, right? So it's like a one-way conversation when I'm out there. And although they bray very loudly, but that's usually like at 5 a.m. when they're like telling me that they want food. But I've seen it as, I'm not only just caring for God's creation, we all have those opportunities to care for God's creation. But, this quiet time that I have with them, it's almost like it's God and I together. We're out there in the early mornings and, we're walking together. We're sharing this peaceful time with this giant animal that is relying on me, right, to care for them. So as it's this picture of I'm relying on Christ to care for me, to nurture me, to grow me. And this donkey is relying on me to do the same. A lot like parenthood with your children, And so I've just
but
enjoyed...
kids talk back though, Brenda.
Oh, that's definitely true. Yeah, I've definitely enjoyed the journey of adopting these donkeys. Yeah, it's been awesome. A really positive experience.
Brenda Long, thank you so much for being on the Outcomes Conference podcast, being transparent, just sharing a little bit of your story, and for even going off script when I asked you about the donkeys. Thank you, Brenda Long.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
And we do thank Brenda Long from Food for the Hungry for sharing her story today. FH.org is where you can find out more about Food for the Hungry. And thank you for joining us today on the Outcomes Conference podcast. And to you, our Outcomes Conference podcast listeners, thanks for joining us. We pray for this podcast, that it inspired you to think higher and deeper about thriving for a greater kingdom impact.
Be sure to visit ChristianLeadershipAlliance.org, where you can stay up to date by subscribing to the Outcomes online newsletter and the CLA Higher Thinking blog.
And if you're not already a member of the Christian Leadership Alliance, what are you waiting for? Join the Alliance today, ChristianLeadershipAlliance.org.
And remember, the wisdom in this podcast came to you on its way to someone else. If you loved it, say so, and then share it with a friend.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Martha.
We'll see you again for the next episode of the Outcomes Conference podcast.
Did you know that God has a calling on your life? It's true. He's called you to bring Jesus to the world. For some, that may look like a pulpit or a foreign mission field, but for most of us, it looks like a construction site, a cubicle, a hospital, or a classroom. Wherever it is that you work, live, volunteer, and invest, that is your mission field. To learn more about integrating your faith into your work and retirement, check out our books, I Work for Him, She Works for Him, and I Retire for Him, by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore.
Thank you for listening to the I Work for Him podcast with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Please visit iworkforhim.com to learn more about connecting your faith and work, to join the I Work for Him Nation, or subscribe to our weekly blog. You can also follow us on social media at I Work for Him to stay up to date and meet our guests. If today's message spoke to you, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Your review will launch more workplace missionaries across America. That's at I Work for Him and online, iworkforhim.com. I work the number 4him.com.